The fluorescent lights of the grocery store flickered above Emma's head as she watched the elderly man's hands tremble over his wallet. He'd been standing at the checkout for nearly 5 minutes, meticulously counting coins with fingers that barely cooperated, while the line behind him grew longer and the sighs grew louder. Most people looked away, checked their phones, or rolled their eyes. But Emma saw something different. She saw her late grandfather, who had once stood in similar lines, dignity crumbling with each impatient glance. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and quietly placed a $20 bill on the counter. The man looked up, his watery blue eyes meeting hers, and in that moment something shifted in Emma's world. She didn't know it then, but that single act of kindness would set in motion a chain of events that would test her faith in humanity and ultimately restore it in the most unexpected way. Emma Chen had always believed that goodness existed in the small moments, in the tiny gestures that most people overlooked. At 28, she worked as a physical therapy assistant at a rehabilitation center, spending her days helping patients regain their strength and independence. The pay wasn't great, and her studio apartment in Queens was barely bigger than a closet. But she'd learned from her immigrant parents that wealth wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in the difference you made in someone's life. After that first encounter at the grocery store, Emma began seeing the old man everywhere. His name was Harold Morrison, and he lived alone in a weathered brownstone 3 blocks from her apartment. She learned that his wife had passed away 2 years ago. His arthritis made simple tasks nearly impossible, and his only son had died in a car accident a decade earlier. Harold's world had shrunk to the size of his living room, where he spent most days watching old movies and waiting for meals on wheels that sometimes never came. Emma started small. She'd knock on his door after work, bringing groceries or a warm meal from the Thai place on the corner. Harold would invite her in, and they'd sit in his cluttered living room surrounded by photographs of a life fully lived. Wedding pictures, military service photos, images of a young boy with Harold's same gentle smile. He told her stories about working as a civil engineer, about building bridges that still stood across the state, about dancing with his wife Margaret under the stars at Coney Island. As weeks turned into months, Emma's visits became the architecture of both their routines. She'd help him sort his medications, organize his bills, and on good days, they'd take slow walks around the neighborhood. Harold's face would light up when he saw her, and he'd have a joke ready, usually terrible, always delivered with perfect timing. "Why don't scientists trust atoms?" he'd ask, eyes twinkling. "Because they make up everything." Emma would groan and laugh, and for those moments, Harold wasn't a lonely old man, and Emma wasn't struggling to make ends meet. They were just 2 people choosing to show up for each other. Emma never asked for anything in return. When Harold tried to pay her, she'd refuse. When he worried he was taking too much of her time, she'd remind him that friendship wasn't a transaction. Her coworkers thought she was crazy, spending her free time caring for someone who wasn't family. Her mother worried she was being taken advantage of. But Emma knew something they didn't, that Harold had given her purpose during a time when she'd been drifting, wondering if her small life in the big city meant anything at all. Then, on a crisp October afternoon, everything changed. Emma arrived at Harold's house with a bag of groceries, and his favorite butterscotch, candies to find a sleek black Mercedes parked outside. She felt a flutter of unease as she climbed the familiar steps and knocked. The door swung open, but instead of Harold's warm greeting, she was met by a man in an expensive suit, his expression cold and assessing. Behind him stood 2 others, equally well-dressed, holding briefcases and looking at her like she was an intruder. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice sharp. "I'm here to see Harold," Emma said, trying to peer past him into the house. "Is he okay?" "And you are?" "Emma Chen. I'm his friend." The man's eyes narrowed. His friend. He said it like the word tasted sour. "I'm Richard Morrison, Harold's grandson, and we need to talk about your friendship with my grandfather." Emma's heart sank. Harold had mentioned Richard a handful of times, always with a sadness in his voice. Richard lived in California, worked in tech, and visited once every few years. The last time Harold had called him, Richard hadn't answered for 3 days. Richard stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. The living room Emma knew so well suddenly felt foreign. Harold sat in his armchair looking smaller than she'd ever seen him, his face drawn with confusion and something that looked like fear. One of the suited men, a lawyer, Emma realized, stood beside him with a yellow legal pad. "Ms. Chen," Richard began, pacing in front of the fireplace like a prosecutor. "My grandfather's bank has flagged unusual account activity. Large withdrawals, checks written to unfamiliar names. When I flew in to investigate, I discovered that you've been a constant presence in his life for months." "Convenient, wouldn't you say?" Emma's mouth went dry. "I don't understand. Harold and I are friends. I've never taken money from him." "Really?" Richard pulled out a folder, spreading papers across the coffee table. "These are bank statements showing $3,000 in checks made out to cash since June. My grandfather has moderate dementia. Ms. Chen, he's vulnerable. And suddenly, after years of managing fine on his own, he has a young woman showing up every day, and his money starts disappearing." The room spun. Emma looked at Harold, whose eyes were filled with tears. "Tell them, Harold, please." But Harold's voice was weak, confused. I don't remember the checks, Emma. I don't remember a lot these days." One of the lawyers spoke up. "Ms. Chen, we're prepared to pursue legal action for elder exploitation and financial abuse. However, if you return the money and sign an agreement to cease all contact with Mr. Morrison, we might be persuaded to settle this quietly." "I didn't take any money," Emma's voice cracked. "Harold, remember? I've been helping you. The groceries, the walks, your medications." Richard cut her off. "Helping yourself, you mean? I've seen this before. People like you target lonely seniors, gain their trust, then drain them dry. My grandfather built a life, and I won't let some opportunist steal what's left of it." Emma felt tears streaming down her face. "This is insane. Why would I do that? I work full-time. I've never asked him for anything." "Then explain the money," Richard demanded. Emma couldn't. She had no idea about any checks or withdrawals. For a terrifying moment, she wondered if Harold's memory issues were worse than she'd realized. If somehow he'd been giving away money she knew nothing about. The lead lawyer placed a document on the table. "Sign this, Ms. Chen. Acknowledge wrongdoing. Agree to repayment terms and stay away, or we file charges Monday morning." Emma's hands shook as she stared at the paper. Everything was falling apart. The friendship that had sustained her. The purpose she'd found. Harold's trust in humanity, all of it crumbling because Richard needed a villain in a story he didn't understand. "I need to make a call," she whispered. "No," Richard said flatly. "You sign now or we're done talking." Emma looked at Harold one last time. The old man who'd told her jokes, who'd shared his stories, who'd made her believe that showing up for people mattered. He looked lost, scared, caught between his grandson's certainty and memories that wouldn't cooperate. She picked up the pen, but before she could sign, Harold's voice cut through the room, stronger than she'd heard in weeks. "Wait!" Everyone turned. Harold was standing now, gripping the arms of his chair, his whole body trembling with effort. "I remember," he said, his voice growing clearer with each word. "The checks weren't for Emma. They were for Margaret's garden." He looked at his grandson, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Your grandmother's favorite charity, Richard. The Community Garden Project in Brooklyn. I've been donating every month since she died. She made me promise. I have the receipts in the desk drawer." The room went silent except for Harold's labored breathing. "Emma never asked me for a penny," he continued, his voice breaking. "She's given me everything. Do you know what it's like, Richard, to be invisible? To feel like you're just waiting to die? Emma made me feel like a person again. She chose to care when she had no reason to, when no one else did." Harold turned to Richard, and Emma saw 3 generations of pain in his eyes. "Your grandmother died, your father died, and you disappeared into your life in California. I understood grief does strange things to people. But Emma showed up. Every single day Emma showed up." Richard's face had gone pale. One of the lawyers quietly opened Harold's desk drawer and pulled out a folder thick with donation receipts, each one made out to Margaret Morrison Memorial Garden Fund. "Mr. Morrison," the lawyer said softly, "these account for every flagged transaction." Richard sank into the sofa, the certainty draining from his face, replaced by something that looked like shame. The room felt too small for all the emotions crowding into it. Emma's relief, Harold's exhaustion, Richard's dawning realization of what he'd almost done. I thought, Richard started, then stopped. I thought I was protecting you, Grandpa. I know, Harold said gently, sitting back down. But Emma's been protecting me all along. From loneliness, from feeling forgotten, from giving up. Richard looked at Emma and she saw tears in his eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I flew in, saw the bank report, and I assumed the worst. I should have called you, Grandpa. I should have been here. Emma found her voice, still shaky but clear. He talks about you all the time, about how proud he is of you, how you're doing important work in California. He doesn't blame you for being far away. Maybe he should, Richard said quietly. What happened next surprised everyone. Harold reached out and took Richard's hand, then extended his other hand to Emma. Life is short, he said. Too short for blame, too short for assumptions, too short to waste on anything but loving the people right in front of you. The lawyers quietly packed their briefcases and left. Richard called the bank to clear up the flags, and Emma, still trembling from how close she'd come to being falsely accused, sat down on the couch and let herself cry, not from fear anymore, but from the overwhelming relief that truth had won.